So just going back to that question of the films that you again advocate for, if we use that phrase, I think one of the things that I found kind of interesting and sort of difficult to reconcile myself was that some of the films that you, again, maybe this is the generational or the historical difference between films of the past and films of the 2000s, or later films, let's say. But that sense of the ones that there's certain films that you say are sort of very much of the artist, or they capture something that is intrinsic, let's say. But some of those films are ones that I would say don't really have a specific directorial vision beyond to the fact that they sit within a kind of particular context of filmmaking. So the example I'm thinking of is kind of like direct cinema, or films in the 1970s that are shot on 16 or 35 mil, and they're pertaining to a certain kind of observational documentary. I think you quote Nichols in the book at one point. And that, to me, that is much less of a kind of that's much less of a sort of sense of here is a director trying to capture the essence of an artist through form, than that's being read onto the artist at a later date because it seems to capture the zeitgeist of the 60s or 70s and stuff like that, which is very different, say, to something that is much more self-consciously experimental later on, that is supposed to be kind of, maybe even eliding the idea, but that music and film are similar, more similar, say, or again, you say this in the book, that this idea that the comparison between music and film is more apt than a comparison between, say, film and theatre or literature, right? So that's a very long-winded way of sort of saying, even that is quite subjective in terms of what you're saying is here, this is in keeping with the artist kind of thing.
Yeah. It's, I mean, you kind of hit the really difficult thing about all of this, and particularly my kind of line in the sand, which is a very kind of shaky position, but it's one I do stand on and like kind of unpacking, which is, let's take Don't Look Back as an example, like Pennebaker's film about Dylan, 65, captures Dylan at that moment. And it is a zeitgeist moment,
Yeah.
And there is something in the fact that the way that film has to be made, or can be made, captures that, super close, 16 mil. There's no real precedent for that's available. There's very few music films out at that time, but there's an emerging documentary space, so there's an idea of what this is going to look like and what it's going to be based on other films that have got nothing to do with music. And at that moment, Dylan is as much a cultural figure as he is a musician.
He is not so much singing as sermonizing.
What happens after that is that Dylan takes more control over what things look like. So there's an authorial voice in the sense of it's assumed that Pennebaker's going to make the film because he's the director and Dylan's the musician. Once Dylan sees it as a kind of text, he becomes interested in how he's perceived and becomes more of an authorial voice later on.
Paragraph. The times, they are a-changing, sings Dylan. They are when a poet and not a pop singer fills a hole.
Were you aware of the fact that tonight at the City Hall here, you had a greater audience than has been seen there for many years? And more appreciation has been heard there. The applause was fantastic. I never heard so much applause there, and I've been coming here for quite a while.
Yeah, that makes me feel good, you know. Makes me feel good.
Are you religious?
Well, I don't know. What does that mean, you know, religious? What does that mean? Do you think you bow down to an idol or go to church every Sunday or that kind of stuff?
No.
Believe in something.
Do you believe in...
I don't believe in anything. No, why should I believe in anything? I don't see anything to believe in.
You think you're cynical?
No, I'm not cynical. I just don't, you know, I can't see anything anybody's offered me to believe that I'm going to believe, put all my trust and faith in everything. Nothing is sacred, right?
Who's in charge?
Of charge of what?
Who is in charge of this room?
What do you mean in charge of this room? It's rented to Bob Dylan. What do you mean who's in charge of it?
Are you Bob Dylan's manager?
Yes, I'm Bob Dylan's manager. But I'm not in charge of his room.
No, you're in charge of Bob Dylan.
No, I'm not in charge
We
of
have
Bob
had
Dylan.
complaints about the noise above, below,
Oh, that's unfortunate. We'll try to hold it down.
and if
What
it
noise?
isn't organised within
What noise?
5 minutes, I will ask you to leave.
Well, why don't you get a constable? Would you please?
I will.
Please do that. There's been no noise in this room.
None of
And you're one of the dumbest assholes and most stupid persons I've ever spoken to in my life.
Get it?
If we're someplace else, I'd punch you in your goddamn nose. You stupid nut. We've rented this room and I'm asking...
But because it captures a moment and it's about Dylan, it's kind of almost kind of like it's cast in amber at that moment. It becomes important. And it's not important in 65 because the film's not released till later, but in that period, it's the document of Dylan at that moment, you know, where there is a music press which is rabid and writing about it all the time. And there's a kind of, you know, there's a conversation around this person, you know, and particularly, you know, the shift away from folk into rock, and what that means for someone who's been as important to a particular genre as he was. And then in that period where it's still very live conversation because there isn't the internet, things don't die off after 2 days. You know, this is a conversation which is happening for years. This thing emerges, which takes everyone back in time to only like 2 or 3 years before, and is like gives people back that moment.